The Chargers running back group is much better than it was in 2024, led by Najee Harris and Omarion Hampton, but it will be the rookie that ends up having the more productive 2025.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 10 seasons together, but this is our 8th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, the Chargers running back room looks a lot different, headlined now by Najee Harris and Omarion Hampton. But that begs the question, which one's going to have more yards and more touchdowns? We're going to talk about it on today's show. And also, the Chargers revamped their entire tight end room. Is it going to be the rookie Oronde Gadsden that leads that room? Or is there another veteran that might sneak in and take that title away? And the Chargers did a lot of work adding quite a bit of bodies on that defensive line, but did they do enough to be able to replace the production that they lost with the guys that left?
Yeah, specifically Poona Ford, just because he was so good. But Poona Ford wasn't what we thought he was this year, last year, right? And it's about who will be this year's Poona Ford, and we'll see what Mike Elston and Jesse Minter can do. But it is a buy or sell Wednesday, meaning that we're getting into the biggest Charger storylines and overreactions, as we do every week, one of our favorite shows. And we're going to start with this one from Casino Chance, who says, buy or sell, Omarion Hampton finishes with more yards and touchdowns than Najee Harris in 2025. David, are you ready to buy that with the rookie yet?
So I love Omarion Hampton and what he brings to the table, and I think just from a physical tools perspective, he's definitely the more explosive of the running backs. The way I look at this situation here is potential versus production, because Najee Harris has been a running back that has been very steady, over 1,000 yards rushing, a little around 4 yards a carry, and about 7 or 8 touchdowns pretty much every single year in the NFL. Omarion Hampton obviously is a rookie who's come off of 2 very impressive seasons in college football, but how is that going to translate to the NFL level? I think when it comes to the rushing yards, I like that to go to Omarion Hampton. I think that he's a guy that has the ability to be a little bit more explosive and be able to rip off some more chunk plays than I think we are going to expect from Najee Harris, who I think is going to get more of that ground and pound, more physical, tough yardage out of things. And that's why I feel like I'm going to split this one. I think that Najee Harris is going to get more touchdowns, but I think ultimately that Omarion Hampton is going to have the most rushing yards.
I totally understand that. And I think it's probably going to be closer, maybe on both accounts, than people think it could be. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people think that just since the Chargers drafted Omarion Hampton in the first round, that he's immediately kind of just going to become that bell cow back and be so much better than Najee that he immediately takes that role and runs with it. I mean, that's not a bad scenario, you know, and there's a good chance that that could happen because, I mean, we know how talented he is. There's a reason he was a first-round running back, and they didn't draft him in the first round at a position that isn't usually drafted in the first round to not play him as a rookie, or at least to not have him be a big part of this offense. I'm going to buy it, but the touchdowns are the part that hold me back and make me wonder a little bit, just because the one thing we don't know is just what the roles are going to be, and if there will be specified roles, if Najee Harris will be the short yardage back, will be the guy that comes in goal line situations to potentially vulture what Omarion Hampton did in between the 20s. Like, there is a realistic possibility that that happens, and that's the thing we don't get to know yet when doing a buy or sell at this point in the offseason, of course. But I do think that even if it starts as a close split, kind of like we saw with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins last year, I think it's going to be pretty similar early on, but I do think that eventually you're going to see one of them take over, and that one is going to be Omarion Hampton. Now, we've had high expectations for rookie running backs and rookie wide receivers that were first-round picks, and that doesn't always work out. Ask, Melvin Gordon or Mike Williams or Quentin Johnston. It doesn't always work out that way. I'm very confident that Omarion Hampton's game is going to translate to the next level, and that he will, by the end of the season, be the lead ball carrier. He will get the most touches in every game. The other thing is, I don't necessarily think he needs more carries to get more yards, just because I think he could be more effective. And the reason I felt comfortable enough with the touchdowns and actually putting him in that situation is, or at least giving him, more potentially than Najee Harris will have, is because I think he can score from more places, right? Like there's a good chance we see him break a couple 20 plus, 30 plus yard touchdowns in 2025, which I don't think we're going to see from Najee Harris. So if that's the case, and it's a pretty equal split on what happens once they get inside the 10-yard line, now you're talking about a situation where he could have enough. But you could see kind of that fantasy vulture like we've seen, David, where it might be hard to pick fantasy-wise between these two guys because it's Omarion Hampton that gets it down there, and then it's Najee Harris that's kind of the hammer that's putting that final blow into the nail.
Well, we just know that that's how the Chargers want to play football, right? They want to have, and not saying that Omarion doesn't have that same type of ability to be able to be that guy who can be that hammer, but we just know that Najee's done it. He's done it at the NFL level. Like he did it against the Chargers specifically, where he can just really wear an opposing defense down and break tackles and stiff arm guys into the dirt and really make things really rough and tough and difficult. And so I think it's going to be hard for the coaching staff, at least at first, to not want to go to that tried and true method of trying to wear down that opposing defense with somebody who has already done it at a very high level in the NFL.
Especially when you're talking about someone, David, that only has 4 fumbles in 5 seasons, or 5 fumbles in 4 seasons in Najee Harris's case, which is pretty good for a running back,
really
especially one that's had as many touches, right? That's the context needed there. That's a lot of touches to only put the ball
over
on the ground.
1,097 carries. Yeah.
And this is the biggest thing. The interesting thing about Najee Harris is when you look at the stats, like he's just never been a big touchdown guy. I mean, he's only had 8 or more touchdowns in one season. That's the most that he's ever had is 8, and every other season was 7 or 6. So it's never really been his calling card. And obviously that, different situations can lend themselves to different guys scoring, and also just was on a really bad offense with some really, really bad quarterbacks. And if you're not getting down there as much, you're not going to score as much. So I don't think it's too much to read into, but I think there's a good chance that Omarion Hampton ends up leading the Chargers in both of those categories. But that would mean obviously big things for the Chargers offense if that was the case. And we have this one from Nicholas Petrilli, who says, buy or sell. If the Chargers have the number 1 rushing game in the league, they will be the best team in the AFC. David, I might surprise you, but I'm buying this one. I do think that if you're telling me, like, if Justin Herbert has an average Justin Herbert season with the best rushing attack in the league, this should be a top offense in the NFL, not just the AFC. And I don't think that the defense is going to fall off enough, or just at least fall off a cliff to where if the Chargers have, the top 3 offense in the league potentially with the best rushing attack in the league and a top, 5 to 10 defense, that they don't have a chance to be the best team in the AFC.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, you look at the top 5 teams in rushing yards in 2024, there's one common theme among all of them. They all made the playoffs in 2024, okay? We're talking about the Baltimore Ravens, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Washington Commanders, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Green Bay Packers. And obviously, the Eagles won the whole thing. So, yes, you're telling me that you're going to give Justin Herbert the best rushing attack in the NFL with the revamped amount of weapons that they have provided to him at tight end and at wide receiver? That, to me, is a no-brainer. I'm absolutely buying it, and that would be the best season probably of Justin Herbert's career by far, in my opinion.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, right? Because if you're the number 1 rushing team, that's a ton of rushing attempts. So it's hard to say that if they were going to run the ball that much, that Justin Herbert would be able to put up the gaudy stats that would compare to, maybe his 2021 season.
I'm just thinking play action is going to be crazy effective.
For sure, but like to lead the league when you're also playing against teams like the Ravens and playing against teams like the Eagles, who are going to run the ball 550 plus times, it's hard to say that because look at what Josh Allen did in his first season with a real rushing attack, right? Look what Jalen Hurts did last year with one of the best rushing attacks in the league. Hard to put up big giant stats at both of those positions, but this is what Justin Herbert's had so far in his career. The Chargers have ranked in the bottom 12 in yards per carry 5 out of the last 6 seasons, and bottom 6 in 3 of his 5 seasons overall. So the best they've ever done with him as far as yards per carry effectiveness, right? 15th. This is the raw rushing totals of what his team's been able to do as far as rushing yards per game. 2020, 18th, 2021, 21st, and 2022, 30th, 23, 25th, and last year, the best year was 17th. He's never even had an above average rushing unit. If you're giving him the best one in the league, that's a really, really dangerous team. But we still have more to get into, including if Oronde Gadsden might not be the best tight end, but at least the best receiving option at tight end in 2025, and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis, maybe you've even tried them, but if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average, in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. And let me tell you, as a parent, you have to be ready when the moment is right because you might not get many of them. But if traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer, and over 150,000 men have already made the switch. You can even read the real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit Rugiet website for full safety information. David, we have more buy or sells to get into, and thank you to the everydayers out there that make shows like these possible. It's not without your guys' contributions. We're doing a fun show for you guys Friday. Make sure you guys hit us up for our boldest of bold predictions. We don't get too crazy with these, even for the overreactions. On Friday, anything goes. Send us your craziest bold predictions at Locked On on Twitter, at Locked On Chargers on Instagram. Call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. But we have some more big overreactions as well, David, on today's show, and some good buy or sells, including this one from Beyond Eons on Instagram, who says, buy or sell, Oronde Gadsden will lead all Chargers tight ends in receiving yards at season's end. Buy or sell?
I love Oronde Gadsden, and I really appreciate everything that he's brought to the table, his work ethic, the size, the speed. I think he is going to be a very, very good player in this league. I do think, though, it's going to take a little bit of time for the blocking part of it to get him on the field enough for him to qualify to get enough receiving yards to lead the team. That's why I feel very strongly that the tight end who's going to lead the team in receiving yards is the veteran Tyler Conklin. I just think that you have to look at what he did with Zach Wilson throwing him the football, over 600 receiving yards. And this is a guy who is just rock solid, steady, a guy that's there every day, a guy that has very strong hands. He doesn't drop any passes. I think he's just a guy that's been waiting for an opportunity to play with a quarterback the caliber of a Justin Herbert. And I think this could be his breakout season here this far into his NFL career.
Yeah, and I think it would probably take a Tyler Conklin injury for this buy or sell to come true, in my opinion, at least as we see it right now. I actually am buying that he will lead the Chargers in receiving yards by the end of the season in 2026. I think that is when you will see him take off and really kind of find a place in this offense. And in Tyler Conklin, who was signed before they drafted Oronde Gadsden, which is important to remember, is a good kind of bridge to get there and a good kind of stopgap until he's ready to take. But yeah, like you, I'm pretty bullish on what Tyler Conklin should be able to do, just as someone that comes in with such a high floor, in my opinion, and just kind of knowing what his game is. I'm not going to overreact to Tyler Conklin running routes on social media. It's so funny, man, watching that stuff. Obviously, there was something he was, he's with the route god, trying to work on things, trying to, help out his releases and just explosiveness coming out of breaks and things like that. So I think when you're in those kind of situations, having been in similar things to that on the football field, it's always going to look kind of a little funny like it did. But I understand, it wasn't looking like he was the next, Travis Kelce in his prime or, Antonio Gates. But either way, I do think that Oronde Gadsden, he's already kind of pushed this to where it's even a question that can happen right here and what he's done in the offseason.
And kudos to him for that. Alone.
Totally, because it just with the amount of work that he's putting in, the coaches have told us that he's putting in, he's going to give himself his best chance. And they feel like with his willingness to block, they can get something out of that part of his game too. But someone that, no doubt about it, at this point feels like he's going to be part of the offense. But like I've talked about before, I feel like that position group specifically could cannibalize itself, because I think Will Dissly is still going to get a ton of snaps in 2025, more than most people are probably thinking. But let's get to this one next here from Bolted Chad, who says, buy or sell, Jalen Reagor shocks the world and makes the 53-man roster this season. I'm going to sell it, but I don't think it's a huge overreaction. Like, we know this coaching staff loves what Jalen Reagor brings to the table. He's been brought up by all of them. You have Sanjay Lal, talking about it. You also have all the reporters out at these practices saying, hey, with no Mike Williams out there, it's been Jalen Reagor and Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey who've kind of been out there with the starting unit. So I still think it's a numbers game, David, but I don't think it's a total overreaction to think that this could happen.
No, I feel like, to me, that the Chargers kind of feel like Jalen Reagor is that insurance policy for one of the last guys on, the depth chart. And to me, I think that guy is probably KLS. KLS is probably, the guy that I think I look at this and say, maybe if things don't work out with the injury, that, Jalen Reagor is a guy we know they love, the guy that they want to use to stretch the field, to be able to provide that kind of speed in that kind of same mold as, what KLS brings to the table. Obviously, I think KLS is better at it and has better skills when it comes to going and getting the football.
And faster.
But yeah, and he's faster, obviously. But I just think that's what they see it as. But to me right now, I think it's pretty clearly it's Ladd, Mike, QJ, Trey Harris, KLS, and Darius Davis is going to be the 6 wide receivers. And I don't think that changes barring an injury.
And last year they did keep 7, but it was in part to put DJ Chark on the injured reserve as soon as, because they had to make him make the initial roster to put him on the non-season ending injured reserve. So that's how I see it playing out too. It is a numbers game. I do think that because I don't think he's kind of necessarily has to be pigeonholed into any one role. I think they see him as kind of a versatile player that could fit as a practice squad player that into any of those kind of positions. If you need him to play in the slot, if you need him to play X, if you need him to play Z, he can do all those things a little bit, and they're very comfortable with him. But this is also a guy that over the last 3 years has a total of 22 catches. So it's been a while since we've seen anything like a super productive season. The 2024, 7 catches, 22 over the last 3 seasons, only 342 yards and 1 touchdown over 3 seasons. So that's just what it is. And also, per Chris Rim, already dropped a throw from Justin Herbert and OTAs that turned into an interception. So that's going to give all Chargers fans bad flashbacks. But I don't think this is an overreaction just by the way the coaching staff talks about him. A lot of times they're telling us these things, right? And then we look back on it a couple months later, like, man, maybe we shouldn't have been surprised that Jalen Reagor made the roster, because every time they talked about him, they were just absolutely gushing. So I don't think it's a huge overreaction, but I think in the last Jim Harbaugh press conference, it kind of chilled out a little bit, where he's like, hey, we like him, and if he's going to have to do a lot to basically make this team, was the way that I took it. So let's get to this next one here from Big Oil, who says, buy or sell, Ladd McConkey will earn himself a contract extension after 2 seasons with the Chargers. I'll tell you this right now. If the Chargers could sign him after 2 seasons, if he put together another one like he did his rookie year, I think they would absolutely do it. And I would also love to have him on a Jackson Merrill contract, where you just see a young player who's obviously really good and sign them before they can show they can do it, 4 years in a row. But with any NFL rookie, you have to wait at least 3 seasons unless you're released and end up on another team, and clear waivers and all of those things. But for rookies, generally speaking, you have to wait until after the 3rd season before you can extend them. But David, I think as soon as they can, they will.
Yeah, I think they absolutely will, and I don't think there's going to be any reason, barring him not being able to be on the football field, that doesn't happen because of what he brings.
And that's
to
what
the
he
table.
has to prove, though, too, right? Like that's also why
sure.
you wouldn't re-sign him after this season, because it's like you have to show over those first 3 seasons that your body can handle this level of physicality.
That's definitely what it is, because I feel like the skill set is gonna play with anybody because of his ability to get open, with the quickness, with his really just uncanny ability to find the soft spots in the zone. Like, that's gonna play. So that's what I'm saying is, as long as he can prove he can stay on the field, his game is gonna get him paid.
And also, like, if the campaign hasn't been started, there's maybe no better receiver fit for the Olympic flag football team than Ladd McConkey.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you want to talk about someone that should be on there, I mean, Justin Herbert, you could make a very good case for as well, but with no pads on, you're just looking for someone who can get open and don't have to worry about, the physicality catching up to him. Yeah, it's Ladd McConkey. And I think he's already shown that, like we've talked about before, he's a borderline top 10 receiver already. And I think he will be thought of that way by the end of his sophomore season. especially considering last year what we've talked about, just how long it actually took for him to heat up, because it wasn't right away. And then once it started cooking, man, those last 10, 11 weeks of the season, he was just absolutely insane. But we still have more to get into, including if the Chargers did enough this offseason to offset the loss of Poona, Ford, and other players on the defensive line. They got a lot of guys, but did they get enough top-end talent to replace those guys? We're getting into all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. And one of the biggest things for me with Monarch Money that I love the most since I've been using it is just the collaboration and the, how easy it is to use it with my wife. I mean, we have never totally been on the same page. And there's been several times where I'm like, hey, when did we get broke? Because I didn't know this was happening. With Monarch Money, it just keeps you so up to date. It keeps you so intertwined with just you being and knowing everything that's happening with your finances. And me and my wife's money are totally intertwined. Monarch Money has been a great way for us to both kind of know exactly what's going on at all times and know what we need to work on and set goals for ourselves for the next month. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. We have more to get into, David, on this Buy or Sell Wednesday this week, but thank you again to the everydayers as always, and make sure you guys get your boldest predictions in for the Big Bold Prediction Show on Friday, but also thank you for just making us your first listen as always. Make sure if you need a second listen to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they keep you up to date with everything going on around the league. Those guys are really good, and they will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. David, there's one position group that was something we were terrified about last season, and I think if you were looking at just the names in the room this year, you could be terrified going into it again this season if it weren't for kind of the trust that we now feel like with Mike Elston and Jesse Minter. And the buy or sell is this from Jackson, who says, buy or sell, the Chargers have done enough to cover the losses on the interior defensive line in Poona, Ford, and Morgan Fox. David, this is very fair. Two of their most used defensive linemen, Poona, Ford, was legitimately great last season. Did they do enough to try to replace the guy that probably really should have never been let go?
Yeah, I hate it. I still hate it even now that they didn't get a chance to get that deal done. It just seemed like a player that really got a chance here, really flourished, and then just took his golden ticket and cashed out somewhere else. And I think the Chargers had every ability to get that deal done, and they just unfortunately couldn't do it. So did they do enough? I feel like I'm very confident that a guy who is going to get some more opportunities in Tier Tart is really going to shine with those opportunities. I think Deshaun Hand and Naquan Jones are both like good veterans. I feel like they're quality defensive linemen. I think the wild card to me is Jamari Caldwell. I feel like he's a guy who could probably provide a little bit of that pass rush that's going to be missing from this group, with a Morgan Fox that's leaving and, a Poona Ford that's leaving. That's kind of what I'm looking at. They don't have the top end talent. Nobody is a superstar in that room. So that's going to be somebody who's going to have to step up and prove that. But I don't know if it's quite enough. So I'm going to sell it for that specific reason. It's just the lack of top end talent in the room.
I totally understand that. I think it's hard to this is the problem. And Poona Ford was awesome. Morgan Fox was maybe their best interior rusher. But that came with its drawbacks. I mean, you're trying to replace 52 pressures from last season just from those two players, and those, the most, that's most of their pressure from the interior. That's a lot to replace. But Morgan Fox was also pretty rough against the run, right? And with better run defense, you will have better pass rush opportunities, which should help everybody involved on second and third and longs. That is one thing that when you hear them talk about this defensive line, what they talk about the most, well, we're bigger, right? Well, the run wall that we're trying to build feels like it's a run wall. And you even have Mike Elston going to the point where he's saying, hey, we're more skilled than we were last season. And I think that, if some of those Scott Matlock snaps and Tito Eboigbe snaps are now, Naquan Jones or Deshaun Hand, there is a way that's better this year. But I do think the biggest way that it will be enough is because a couple of these guys are going to we're going to feel a lot differently about by the end of the season than we are going in. I didn't believe in it last season with the group they had. I believe in it this season. I think with those guys, whether, a combination of a couple of these guys, and I think T.R. Tart is one of the prime candidates, is going to be so much better than we're thinking of them right now, and will feel like one of those top-end talents, which is not how we felt about Poona Ford, but that's what ended up happening last season. So that leads us nicely to this one here from Tom, who says, buy or sell Jamari Caldwell being more than just a rotational piece by the end of the year. David, he is a rookie. He had 0 sacks last year, but had some the year before. Do you think he can do enough this season, be more than just a guy who rotates and become maybe a full-time starter, I guess is what the next level up of that is?
Yeah, I think that's going to be really tough just because the amount of veterans that are going to be on that defensive line. But I think if there's one thing that's going to get him on the field maybe a little bit more than some of these others, is that ability to get after it as a pass rusher. And at Houston in 2023, he had 6.5 sacks. That's really, really good production. Yeah, he wasn't really playing too much on the inside. He was really more on the defensive end, getting some of that pressure. But that just shows his versatility, shows his ability to get after the quarterback. And I feel like, this is a guy who has really, really nimble feet. And I think if they're able to unlock that part of his game, then yeah, I think this is a guy who absolutely has the skills to be able to get on the field more than maybe we're expecting in 2025.
And that's the other reason you feel good about the defensive line, though, is because it is such a rotation, and the freshness of these guys makes a big difference. And I think it did for, all of those guys last season. And I think no matter what, it's going to be a rotation. I don't think you're going to see a spot where Jamari Caldwell ends up, playing 80% of the snaps in a game. I just don't think they use their guys like that. And he's a guy that, can play 3 technique and can also be a nose tackle. But you can't teach size, right? That's number one. And I do think he's going to bring some run stoppability even early on, even if the pass rush part and those chops need to be developed a little bit more. He will bring something. So I do think he can be a starting player for them by the end of the season. Now, it'll still be a rotation, but I think you could see him as that first guy. I could see him overtaking a Naquan Jones as the season progresses and a Tito Eboigbe. I don't know if there's, as much competition even with veterans there, that it feels like that's unattainable by any means, because at that size, to move like that is just incredibly rare, and I do think that he'll bring some things even early on. But he would have had more of a chance if he had, a full off season with Ben Herbert, and it didn't have to go through the off season draft circuit and all those other things that he had to do. But I like Jamari Sawyer. They really like him because they feel like they saw both, and I was smiling when you were talking because I was thinking about Houston using, big ass Jamari Caldwell on the edge as if he was like, Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack out there trying to rush the passer. And it just looked, aesthetically very, very funny.
Terrifying for the offense, though.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, and there's another good one that I came up with here because I think it's another big part of this conversation. And it's buy or sell. The Chargers need a leap from Justin Eboigbe, because you brought up Jamari Caldwell as kind of the X factor here. I think that another one of those kind of things, another one of those players could be Justin Eboigbe, because I do think if you have Justin Eboigbe really taking a leap, that brings another kind of layer to this defensive line. So the buy or sell is the Chargers need a leap from Justin Eboigbe in 2025.
Yeah, I feel like that I'm going to buy it because this right here is a wild card, a guy we have really no information about because he basically redshirted his rookie season. And,
Absolutely.
They obviously had a very specific plan for him. Hey, we need you to get bigger. We need you to get stronger. He, reportedly put on 20 pounds of good weight, which is good for him. And also when you look at the defensive line, there's not really any kind of clearly defined roles as of this moment. So he has opportunity. That's all he can ask for right now, to go get a role, go find himself, go carve himself out a role, and be one of those guys that is a part of that rotation. Because right now he's on the outside looking in, so he has a clean slate, a new opportunity to try to go out there and take that leap. And if he does, then we absolutely will be thinking about this defensive line in a much better light than we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Because if you have 5 different dudes who you feel good about, whether between T.R. Tart and Deshaun Hand and Naquan Jones and Justin Eboigbe and Jamari Caldwell, now it feels like a big strength for your team if you're getting something from all those guys. And kind of like Jamari Caldwell, this is a dude who was all SEC at Alabama his final year there and had 7 sacks. He actually was more of a tweener where, he's kind of an edge rusher, kind of a defensive tackle, whereas Jamar Caldwell should have just always been a defensive tackle. But this is what gets you excited. Hearing this from Jesse Minter when he says, we do have high expectations for him. I could not be more proud and excited about the work that he's put in. He's put on 20 plus pounds since the end of the season. He's trained with Coach Herb quite a bit, which I'm really excited about because I know the impact he can have on guys in their development. So it feels like now he is a full-time defensive tackle. He is on the defensive line, not kind of that tweener body. And that could end up being what gets, him to the next level and is able to make him a productive player. And if he can be a productive player in that rotation or even be better than that, now it's a room that looks completely different. I'd say the last X factor is probably just the health of Deshaun Hand, because he's the guy that's kind of the Poona Ford of that room, where it's like we've actually seen him do it at a high level. The only thing that's gotten in the way is the injuries. And I mean, if he can stay healthy, he's a guy that could be this year's Poona Ford, something to keep an eye on as well. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Remember, again, Friday, the biggest show, the biggest overreactions you could say, but the biggest bold predictions more than anything we're going to be getting into. So make sure you guys submit your bold predictions, whether it's in the YouTube comments or in a post we put out on YouTube, at Locked On LAC on Twitter, at Locked On Chargers on Instagram, or wherever you contact us. Make sure you put your boldest predictions, because usually we don't go with the craziest ones, but this is a Friday where anything goes. Think of a Thier. Think of what would a Thier say? How crazy would a Thier get? Because he will be getting crazy for it. But we want to hear your guys' boldest predictions for this 2025 Chargers season. You can also find the show on all of our social media as well, or call into the voicemail line and leave a 30-second bold prediction at 323-524-7924. But to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from as we continue what's been a very, very fun offseason, David, as we work towards training camp when all things will be ready to fire off. But we'll be back with you guys on Friday with our big bold prediction show. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.